Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we share the wildest stories of entitled people, HOA nightmares, and neighbor drama that'll make your jaw drop. Today's story is absolutely insane. We're talking about a HOA board member who completely lost it when I installed a gate on my own property. Her son actually called 911. Because I locked my own gate. On my own land. You can't make this stuff up. Stick around because this story has police involvement, emergency HOA meetings, false complaints, and a plot twist you won't see coming. Let's get into it. Inspector Williams was waiting for my response. I took a breath and tried to keep my voice steady. Yes, I'm the owner. I'm at work right now, but I have all the permits and documentation. The gate was fully approved by both the HOA and the city. I understand, Inspector Williams said, his tone neutral. The complaint alleges that the structure was built without proper permits. Do you have the permit numbers handy? I pulled up my documentation folder on my computer. Read off the permit numbers. There was a pause as he presumably checked his database. Okay, I'm seeing the permits here. They appear to be in order. And the structure matches what was approved. Relief flooded through me. So there's no violation? Not that I can see. The complaint also mentioned emergency access issues, but this is clearly a residential driveway gate on private property. That's not an emergency access concern. So what happens now? I'll file my report stating that the structure is permitted and compliant. The complaint will be closed. However, I do need to inform you that the person who filed the complaint has the right to appeal my findings. Of course they did. How long does that process take? Could be a few weeks. But honestly, Mr. Johnson, appeals are rarely successful when the permits are this clearly in order. I wouldn't worry too much. We ended the call and I sat back in my chair. One threat neutralized. But Karen had also mentioned filing with the county about emergency access. That would be coming too. And who knew what else she'd try. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in a strange state of hypervigilance. Every day I'd check my cameras obsessively. Every time I came home, I'd inspect my property for new vandalism. The county inspector came and went, finding nothing wrong, just like the city inspector. Karen tried filing a complaint with the fire marshal about the gate supposedly blocking emergency vehicle access. The fire marshal came out, measured everything, and determined that my private driveway had nothing to do with emergency access routes. Each complaint was dismissed. Each inspection found nothing wrong. But the stress was exhausting. Then something unexpected happened. 3 weeks after the HOA meeting, I got a call from Donald Reeves. Matt, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're having a special board meeting tomorrow night. Karen's being removed from the board. I sat up straight. What? How? Turns out, filing false complaints and using her board position to harass residents violates our HOA bylaws. Several board members and at least a dozen residents filed formal complaints against her. We voted, and it was unanimous among the other 4 of us. She's out. I couldn't quite process it. Does she know? She will tomorrow night. I wanted to let you know in case she escalates. Thank you for the warning. That night, I made sure all my cameras were working and even parked my car in the garage instead of the driveway. Just in case. The next evening, my phone started blowing up with texts from neighbors. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Karen's getting removed. Are you going to be there? This is going to be epic. I decided not to go. I'd had enough drama. Instead, I stayed home, ordered takeout, and tried to relax for the first time in weeks. Around 8:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I checked the camera feed. It was Susan Chen from the HOA board. I opened the door. Hi, Susan. Hi, Matt. Just wanted to stop by and let you know that Karen has been officially removed from the board. She's no longer in any position of authority in the HOA. How did she take it? Susan made a face. About as well as you'd expect. Lots of yelling, threats to sue, claims that we're all conspiring against her. But it's done. And I wanted you to know that if she retaliates in any way, the board will back you completely. I appreciate that more than you know." After Susan left, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The next few days were quiet. No complaints filed. No letters taped to my door. No Brad lurking around at 3 a.m. It seemed like maybe, finally, it was over. Then, exactly 1 week after Karen's removal, I came home from work to find a "for sale" sign in her yard. I stood there staring at it. They were moving. Mrs. Patterson walked over, grinning. "Did you see? She's leaving. Can't stand that she's not in charge anymore, so she's packing up and going. I can't believe it. Believe it. I heard her telling someone on the phone that she can't live in a neighborhood that doesn't appreciate her contributions. Good riddance, I say." Over the next month, I watched as the Henderson house went through the selling process. Brad's truck appeared less and less. Karen stopped going on her clipboard walks around the neighborhood. It was like the whole street could breathe again. The house sold in 3 weeks. A young couple with a toddler moved in. I introduced myself, mentioned I was next door, and they were genuinely friendly. "We heard there was some drama with the previous owners," the wife said. "But everyone in the neighborhood has been so welcoming. We're really happy to be here." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "And if you ever need anything, just knock." She smiled. "Actually, we love your gate. We're thinking of installing something similar. Would you mind sharing your contractor's information?" I laughed. A genuine, relieved laugh. "I'd be happy to." That evening, I sat on my porch, looking at my gate. The gate that had caused so much chaos. So many police visits, HOA meetings, false complaints, and sleepless nights. But it was still there. Standing firm on my property line. Exactly where it belonged. My phone buzzed with a text from Officer Martinez. "Just wanted to let you know that Bradley Henderson accepted a plea deal for the vandalism charge. Restitution, community service, and probation. Case closed." I typed back a simple, "Thank you." And just like that, it was really over. I'd installed a gate on my own property to stop trespassing. And I'd ended up fighting a war I never wanted. But I'd won. Not because I was confrontational or aggressive. But because I documented everything, followed every rule, and refused to back down when I was in the right. Karen had tried to use her position, false complaints, harassment, and intimidation to get her way. And it had all backfired spectacularly. She'd lost her board position. Her son had a criminal record. And she'd been forced to move out of a neighborhood where everyone now knew exactly who she was. I pressed the button on my remote. The gate opened smoothly. I walked through it and closed it behind me. On my property. Protecting my space. Exactly as it should be. Sometimes standing up for yourself is exhausting. Sometimes doing the right thing feels like the hardest thing in the world. But it's always worth it. Because at the end of the day, your property is yours. Your boundaries matter. And no amount of entitlement from others changes that fundamental truth. The gate stayed. Karen left. And life in the neighborhood finally returned to peaceful. The way it should have been all along. You know that feeling when you think you've finally escaped the chaos of entitled neighbors? When you believe that your own property, your own space, is actually yours? Yeah, I thought I knew that feeling too. Until the day I locked my own gate. On my own property. And suddenly found myself dealing with flashing police lights, an hysterical HOA board member, and her adult son who apparently thought 911 was his personal complaint hotline. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. I'd been living in this neighborhood for about 3 years. Nice quiet street, decent houses, the kind of place where people wave at each other while taking out the trash. Or at least, that's what I thought. The HOA was relatively quiet for the first 2 years. Standard stuff, you know, don't paint your house neon green, keep your lawn maintained, the usual suburban rulebook. Then Karen moved in next door. And I'm not just using that name as a stereotype. Her actual name was Karen. Karen Henderson, HOA board member, self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, and apparently, someone who believed property lines were merely suggestions. The problem started small. She'd comment on my lawn being half an inch too long. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes about my garbage cans being visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. She even measured the height of my mailbox to make sure it complied with some obscure regulation she dug up from 1987. I dealt with it. Smiled, nodded, made the adjustments, kept the peace. But then she started using my driveway. Not asking. Just parking there. Her son, who I'll call Brad because he absolutely looked like a Brad, would park his oversized truck in my driveway whenever he visited. Which was constantly. The first time, I thought maybe it was an honest mistake. I knocked on her door politely. Explained that it was my driveway, and could they please park in their own space. Karen looked at me like I'd just asked her to donate a kidney. She actually said, and I quote, "Well, there's plenty of room, and we have guests over. It's not hurting anyone." Not hurting anyone. On my property. I took a deep breath and repeated that I needed my driveway clear. She rolled her eyes and called Brad to move his truck. But it happened again the next week. And the week after that. Every single time Brad visited, that truck was in my driveway. I started documenting it with photos, timestamps, the whole thing. Because I knew where this was heading. After the 5th time, I sent a formal email to the HOA, complete with photographic evidence, and a request for them to address the issue. The response I got back was incredible. Karen, as a board member, had replied to my complaint herself. She wrote that neighbors should be flexible and accommodating, and that I was creating unnecessary conflict over a non-issue. A non-issue. Someone repeatedly parking on my property without permission was a non-issue. That's when I decided to install a gate. I checked every single HOA regulation, city ordinance, and property restriction. I made absolutely certain that I was within my rights. The gate was tasteful, matched the neighborhood aesthetic, met all height requirements, and was completely on my property line. I even submitted the plans to the HOA for approval, following every bureaucratic step they required. It took 6 weeks, but I got approval. In writing. Signed by 2 board members. Not Karen, of course, but 2 others who actually seemed reasonable. The gate was installed on a Tuesday. Beautiful wrought iron, automatic opener, the works. I felt like I'd finally won something. Finally established a boundary that couldn't be ignored or steamrolled. That evening, I was inside making dinner when I heard shouting. I looked out the window and there was Karen, standing at my new gate, her face red, literally shaking with anger. Brad was with her, looking equally furious, gesturing at the gate like it had personally insulted his entire bloodline. I walked outside, trying to maintain my composure. Before I could even say hello, Karen started screaming. "You cannot do this! This is against HOA regulations! You're blocking access!" I calmly explained that the gate was approved, showed her the documentation on my phone, and pointed out that it was entirely on my property. She wasn't having it. "This is hostile. You're creating a hostile environment. This gate is passive-aggressive." A gate. On my own property. Was passive-aggressive. Brad chimed in, his voice dripping with entitlement. "Yeah man, this is really messed up. We've been parking there for months. You can't just suddenly block us out." I stared at him. Actually stared. Trying to process the logic that parking on someone else's property for months somehow granted him permanent rights to continue doing so. "That's exactly the point," I said, keeping my voice level. "You've been parking on my property without permission. This gate ensures that doesn't happen anymore." Karen's eyes went wide. "Are you saying we're not welcome here? Are you saying you won't help your neighbors?" The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. Somehow, me protecting my own property had transformed into me being an unwelcoming, hostile neighbor who refused to help people. I tried one more time to explain. "This has nothing to do with being welcoming. This is about my property rights. The gate is legal, it's approved, and it's staying." That's when Karen made her first threat. "We'll see about that. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. This gate is coming down." She stormed off, Brad following behind her, both of them muttering about property values and neighborhood harmony. I went back inside, frustrated but confident in my position. I had the approval. I had followed every rule. There was nothing they could do. The next morning, I left for work around 7:30. The gate was closed and locked, as it should be. I used my remote to open it, drove through, and watched it close behind me in my rearview mirror. Everything was working perfectly. I got home around 6 that evening. And that's when things went completely off the rails. There were 2 police cars parked in front of my house. Lights flashing. My heart started racing. Had something happened? Was there a break-in? An accident? I pulled up to my gate and pressed the remote. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. Still nothing. I looked closer and realized someone had zip-tied my gate shut from the outside. Multiple zip ties, thick industrial ones, deliberately preventing the gate from opening. One of the officers walked over to my car. "Are you the homeowner?" he asked. "Yes, officer." "What's going on? And why is my gate zip-tied?" He looked uncomfortable. "We received a 911 call about an illegal structure blocking access to the neighborhood. The caller stated that you'd installed the gate without permission and that it was preventing emergency access." I felt my blood pressure spike. "That's completely false. The gate is approved by the HOA, it's on my property, and it doesn't block any emergency access." "Who called this in?" The officer glanced back toward Karen's house. "A Mr. Bradley Henderson called it in. He stated his mother is an HOA board member and that this gate is illegal." Brad had called 911. Because I locked my own gate. On my own property. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and showed the officer all my documentation. The HOA approval. The property survey. The city permits. Everything. He looked it over, nodded slowly. "This all seems in order. But I'm going to need you to open the gate so we can verify it's not blocking any public access." "I would love to," I said, pointing at the zip ties. "But someone vandalized my property and zip-tied it shut." The officer's expression changed. He walked over to inspect the zip ties, then came back. "Did you see who did this?" "No, but I can guess. The same people who called 911 are the ones who've been harassing me about this gate since it was installed yesterday." That's when Karen and Brad emerged from their house. Karen was practically running over, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "Officer! Thank goodness you're here. This man has illegally blocked our access. We can't get through. This is a safety hazard." The officer held up his hand. "Ma'am, I've reviewed the documentation. This gate is legal and it's on his property. It's not blocking any public access." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. But I'm on the HOA board. This wasn't properly approved." I pulled up the email on my phone again. "Actually, Karen, it was approved by the board. Here's the email with the signatures. Your fellow board members signed off on it." Her face went from red to purple. "They didn't consult me. I would have voted against it. This is a violation of neighborhood standards." The second officer joined us now. "Ma'am, whether you personally approved it or not, the gate is legal. However, we do have the issue of vandalism. Someone zip-tied this gate shut, which is destruction of property." Brad stepped forward, and this is where things got really wild. "I did it," he said, chest puffed out like he was proud. "That gate is illegal and I took action to protect the neighborhood." Both officers turned to look at him. The first officer spoke slowly. "Sir, you're admitting to vandalizing this man's property?" "It's not vandalism," Brad insisted. "It's civil disobedience. That gate is blocking access and it's a safety issue. Sir, the gate is legal. And you've just admitted to damaging it. I'm going to need to see your ID." That's when Karen absolutely lost it. She started screaming about police overreach, about how her son was protecting the community, about how I was the real criminal for being hostile to my neighbors. The officer remained calm, asked Brad for his ID, and began writing up a report. I stood there, watching this entire circus unfold on my front lawn. All because I locked my gate. On my own property. Karen was now on her phone, calling someone, her voice shrill. "Yes, I need you here immediately. The police are harassing my son for trying to help the neighborhood. This is an emergency." More cars started pulling up. Neighbors emerging from their houses to see what the commotion was about. And I realized this wasn't ending anytime soon. Within 10 minutes, my quiet street looked like a block party. Except instead of music and barbecue, we had flashing police lights and a screaming HOA board member. Karen was still on her phone, pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly as she spoke to whoever was on the other end. Brad stood next to one of the police cars, arms crossed, looking defiant as the officer continued writing his report. And I just stood there on my own property, behind my legally installed gate that someone had vandalized, wondering how my life had become an episode of a reality TV show. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down walked over, her elderly face creased with concern. "What on earth is happening?" she asked me quietly. I gave her the short version. She looked at the gate, looked at Karen, looked at the police, and shook her head. "That woman has been nothing but trouble since she moved in," she whispered. "Last month she tried to find me because my roses grew over my fence line by 3 inches. Before I could respond, a silver Mercedes pulled up. Out stepped a man in an expensive suit, briefcase in hand, walking with the kind of confidence that screamed lawyer. Karen practically ran to him. "Richard! Thank God you're here! They're trying to arrest Bradley." The lawyer, Richard apparently, held up a calming hand. "Karen, slow down. Tell me what's happening." She launched into her version of events. A version where I was a hostile neighbor who'd illegally erected a gate to spite her family, where Brad was a hero who tried to restore access for emergency vehicles, and where the police were overstepping their authority by threatening her innocent son. It was impressive, really. The way she could completely rewrite reality in real time. Richard listened, nodded, then walked over to the officers. "Gentlemen, I'm Richard Caldwell, legal counsel for Mrs. Henderson. I'd like to understand what's happening here." The first officer, whose name tag read Martinez, remained professional. "Mr. Caldwell, we responded to a 911 call about an alleged illegal structure. Upon investigation, we found that the gate in question is fully legal and approved. However, Mr. Henderson has admitted to vandalizing the gate by securing it with zip ties, preventing it from functioning." Richard's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Disappointment maybe. Or recognition that his client's son had just confessed to a crime in front of 2 police officers. "I see," Richard said carefully. "And what action are you taking?" "We're documenting the vandalism. The homeowner has the right to press charges if he chooses." All eyes turned to me. Karen's eyes were shooting daggers. Brad looked like he wanted to say something, but Richard shot him a look that clearly meant, "Shut up." Officer Martinez addressed me directly. "Sir, do you want to press charges for the vandalism?" I looked at Brad. At his entitled expression that still somehow suggested he'd done nothing wrong. At Karen, whose face was twisted with barely contained rage. At my gate, zip-tied shut, violated. "Yes," I said. "I want to press charges." Karen exploded. "Are you kidding me? Over some plastic ties? This is ridiculous. You're going to ruin my son's life over a petty dispute?" "Mom, it's fine," Brad said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bravado. "This is all going to blow back on him anyway." Officer Martinez continued his report, asking for my contact information, photographing the zip ties, documenting everything. The second officer, whose name was Chen, began cutting the zip ties off my gate. There were 7 of them. 7 industrial-strength zip ties that had been deliberately placed to keep my gate locked shut. As Chen worked, more neighbors gathered. Some looked concerned. Others looked entertained, like this was the most exciting thing to happen on our street in years. Mr. Wilson from across the street walked up to me. That gate's on your property, right? He asked. Yes, sir, completely. He nodded. Good. About time someone stood up to her. She tried to tell me my American flag was half an inch too big last summer. Richard was now talking quietly with Karen and Brad, probably explaining to them that admitting to vandalism in front of police officers was not a brilliant legal strategy. Karen kept interrupting him, her voice rising. But the HOA regulations. The emergency access. He can't just. Karen, Richard said, his tone firm. I need you to stop talking. Right now. That seemed to penetrate. She fell silent, but her expression promised this was far from over. Officer Chen finished removing the last zip tie. Sir, your gate should be functional now. I'd recommend installing a security camera if you don't already have one. Already planning on it, I said. Martinez handed me a case number and some paperwork. We'll be in touch about next steps. In the meantime, document everything. Photos, videos, any interactions with your neighbors. I have been, I assured him. He nodded approvingly. Good. Keep it up. The officers got back in their cars and left. The crowd of neighbors began to disperse, though I caught several sympathetic looks thrown my way. Richard spoke quietly with Karen and Brad for another minute, then walked over to me. Mr. Johnson. Matt Johnson. Mr. Johnson, I apologize for this situation. I've advised my clients to have no further contact with you regarding the gate. If there are HOA concerns, they'll be addressed through proper channels. It was the most reasonable thing anyone from Karen's camp had said all evening. I appreciate that, Mr. Caldwell. He nodded and walked back to his car. Karen and Brad went inside their house without another word, though Karen slammed her door hard enough that I heard it from across the yard. I finally used my remote to open my gate, drove through, and parked in my own driveway. On my own property. Something that should have been simple from the start. Inside, I poured myself a drink and sat down, my hands actually shaking from the adrenaline. My phone started buzzing. Text messages from neighbors I barely knew. Saw what happened? Good for you standing your ground. Karen's been a nightmare since she moved in. Glad someone finally called her out. Need anything? We're here if you need witnesses to her behavior. It was validating but also surreal. I just wanted to install a gate. Now I was apparently leading some kind of neighborhood resistance movement. That night I barely slept. Every sound outside made me wonder if Brad was back, doing more damage. If Karen was plotting her next move. If this was going to escalate further. Around 2 a.m., I got up and ordered a security camera system. 4 cameras, motion detection, cloud storage, the works. Next day delivery. The following morning was Friday. I called into work and took the day off to deal with the aftermath. My email inbox had 3 new messages. One was from the HOA president, Donald Reeves. Subject line: Emergency board meeting gate dispute. I opened it with a sense of dread. Dear Mr. Johnson, it has come to the board's attention that there is a dispute regarding the recently installed gate on your property. An emergency meeting has been called for Saturday at 2 p.m. to discuss the matter. Your attendance is requested but not required. The meeting will be held at the community center. Requested but not required. Translation: We're going to discuss you whether you're there or not. The second email was from Karen, sent at 11:47 p.m. Subject line: Violation notice. Dear Mr. Johnson, as a member of the HOA board, I am issuing you a formal violation notice for the installation of a hostile structure that creates an unwelcoming environment for neighbors. You have 10 days to remove the gate or face fines of $100 per day. Regards, Karen Henderson, HOA board member. I read it 3 times. Hostile structure. Unwelcoming environment. She was actually trying to fine me for having a gate. A gate that was approved by the board. The third email was from one of the board members who'd signed my gate approval, Susan Chin. Matt, I heard about what happened yesterday. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. For what it's worth, that gate was properly approved and Karen has no authority to issue that violation notice on her own. I'll be at the meeting Saturday to set the record straight. Hang in there. At least someone on the board had sense. I spent the morning documenting everything. Screenshots of every email. Photos of the gate from multiple angles. Pictures of the cut zip ties that I'd saved as evidence. The police report number. I created a folder labeled HOA Gate Dispute and organized everything chronologically. Then I started researching property rights, HOA regulations in my state, legal precedents for board members abusing their authority. The more I read, the more confident I became. Karen didn't have a leg to stand on. But confidence didn't make the anxiety go away. Around noon, a truck pulled up. I looked out the window, immediately tense. But it was just the security camera installation service I'd paid extra to have come out same day. 2 technicians spent the next 3 hours installing cameras. One covering the gate. One covering my driveway. One covering the front door. One covering the side yard. All connected to my phone, recording to the cloud, motion-activated notifications enabled. You having trouble with someone? One of the technicians asked as he programmed the system. You could say that. He nodded knowingly. These cameras will catch everything. Make sure you save important footage separately, just in case. By mid-afternoon, my house was equipped with a security system that could have monitored a small bank. But I felt safer. More in control. Like I had evidence on my side, not just my word against Karen's increasingly unhinged accusations. That evening, I got a knock on my door. I checked the new camera feed on my phone first. It was Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor with the overgrown roses. I opened the door. Hi, Mrs. Patterson. Hello, dear. I wanted to bring you these. She held out a plate of cookies. Thought you might need some comfort food after yesterday. The gesture was so unexpectedly kind that I felt a lump in my throat. Thank you. That's really thoughtful. Also, she said, lowering her voice, I want you to know that several of us neighbors are planning to attend that meeting tomorrow. Karen doesn't speak for all of us, and it's time the board knew that. You don't have to do that. Oh, we know we don't have to. We want to. That woman has made life miserable for half the street. Someone finally standing up to her? We're here for it. After she left, I sat with those cookies and felt something shift. This wasn't just about me and my gate anymore. This was about a pattern of behavior that had affected multiple people. Karen had overplayed her hand. And now people were willing to speak up. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. I spent the morning rehearsing what I'd say at the meeting. Kept it factual, unemotional, evidence-based. Don't get defensive, don't get angry, just present the facts. At 1:30 p.m., I gathered my folder of documentation and headed to the community center. There were already a dozen cars in the parking lot. Way more than usual for an HOA meeting. Inside, the main room was set up with a table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs facing them. At least 30 people were there. I recognized most of them as neighbors from my street and the surrounding blocks. Karen was already seated at the board table, looking smug. Donald Reeves, the president, sat in the center. Susan Chin, the board member who'd emailed me, sat on the other side. 2 other board members I didn't know well filled out the table. Karen's eyes locked onto me as I entered. Her expression was triumphant, like she'd already won. I took a seat in the 3rd row. Mrs. Patterson gave me an encouraging nod from across the aisle. Donald called the meeting to order at exactly 2 p.m. Thank you all for coming. We have a single item on today's agenda. The gate installed at 4782 Maple Drive, Mr. Johnson's property. Karen, you called this meeting. Please present your concerns. Karen stood up, and I realized she'd prepared a whole presentation. She had a printed poster board with photos of my gate. Photos that made it look imposing and aggressive through selective angles and dramatic lighting. Thank you, Donald. What we're dealing with here is a clear violation of our neighborhood's community standards. And here we go. Karen stood at the front of the room, her poster board propped up on an easel, looking every bit like a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument. What we're dealing with here," she began, her voice dripping with manufactured concern, "is a clear violation of our neighborhood's community standards and values." She pointed to the first photo on her board. My gate, photographed from a low angle that made it look like the entrance to a fortress. "This structure," she continued, "was installed without proper community consultation. Yes, Mr. Johnson may have gotten signatures from 2 board members, but this decision affects the entire neighborhood. We should have had a community vote." I felt my jaw clench. The HOA bylaws didn't require a community vote for individual property modifications. Only board approval. Which I had. Donald Reeves cleared his throat. "Karen, the bylaws are clear on this. Individual property modifications only require board approval, which Mr. Johnson obtained." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Bylaws can be interpreted flexibly when it comes to matters that affect community harmony. And this gate absolutely affects our community." She flipped to another photo. This one showed Brad's truck in my driveway, taken from what must have been weeks ago. "For months, we had an informal arrangement. Mr. Johnson allowed us to use a small portion of his driveway when we had guests. It was neighborly. It was kind. It showed the spirit of community that we value here." My mouth actually fell open. She was presenting their trespassing as some kind of generous gift I'd given them. An arrangement I'd agreed to. Mrs. Patterson's hand shot up. "That's not what happened, and everyone knows it," she called out. Karen's face tightened. "Mrs. Patterson, please wait for the public comment period. There wasn't any arrangement," Mrs. Patterson continued, ignoring the request. "Your son parked on his property without permission, repeatedly, and Matt asked you to stop multiple times." Several other neighbors nodded in agreement. Karen's composure cracked slightly. That's not the point. The point is that this gate represents a hostile attitude toward neighbors. Look at it." She gestured dramatically at the photos. "This isn't a friendly fence. This is a barrier. A statement that says stay away. Is that the kind of neighborhood we want to be? One where people build walls between each other?" It was impressive rhetoric, I had to admit. Completely disconnected from reality, but impressive. Susan Chin spoke up from the board table. "Karen, I was one of the members who approved this gate. I reviewed the plans thoroughly. It meets every single HOA requirement. Height, materials, color, placement, everything. You can't retroactively decide it's not approved just because you don't like it." "I'm not trying to retroactively disapprove it," Karen said, her voice rising. "I'm saying it creates a hostile environment, which is absolutely something the HOA can regulate under our Community Harmony Clause." "The Community Harmony Clause," Donald said slowly, flipping through a binder, "is meant to address things like excessive noise, offensive decorations, or harassment. Not legal structures on private property." Karen's face was getting red. "So we're just supposed to accept that a board member can be locked out of a neighbor's property? That emergency vehicles might not be able to access that driveway if needed? It's not your property," I said, unable to stay quiet any longer. "And emergency vehicles have never used my driveway. That's not even a real concern." Karen whirled to face me. "Of course you'd say that. You've been hostile from the beginning. Refusing simple neighborly requests. Making everything difficult. I asked you to stop trespassing on my property," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger coursing through me. "That's not being hostile. That's enforcing basic property rights. See?" Karen pointed at me triumphantly. "This attitude. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't how neighbors treat each other." Donald held up his hand. "Let's everyone take a breath. Mr. Johnson, did you want to present your side?" I stood up, my folder of documentation in hand. "Yes, thank you." I walked to the front and handed copies of my documentation to each board member. "Everything Karen just said is a distortion of what actually happened. I didn't have an arrangement with her family. Her son parked on my property without permission, repeatedly, despite my multiple requests for him to stop." I showed the timestamps on my photos. Here's evidence of Brad's truck in my driveway on 6 separate occasions over 2 months. Each time, I asked them to stop. Each time, I was told I was being unreasonable. I pulled out the HOA approval. I followed every single rule. I submitted plans. I got approval from the board. I installed a gate that meets every regulation. There is nothing illegal or improper about what I did. Karen interrupted. But you didn't consult with the community. Because I don't have to, I said firmly. The bylaws don't require it. And honestly, Karen, after months of you and your son ignoring my property rights, I wasn't interested in asking your permission to protect my own land. The room was dead silent. Donald was reading through my documentation carefully. Susan was nodding along. The other 2 board members looked uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else. There's also the matter of the vandalism, I continued. 2 days ago, your son admitted to police officers that he zip-tied my gate shut. That's destruction of property. I have the police report right here. I handed over a copy. Karen's face went from red to purple. That was an act of civil disobedience. Bradley was trying to protect the neighborhood from an illegal structure. It wasn't illegal, Susan said flatly. We've established that multiple times now. And calling 911 because your neighbor locked their own gate? Mrs. Patterson chimed in again. That's an abuse of emergency services. Another neighbor stood up, a man I recognized but didn't know well. I'd like to say something. Karen issued me a violation notice last year because my basketball hoop was supposedly 2 inches over the height limit. She measured it herself, showed up with a tape measure and everything. Cost me $300 in fines before I finally got it resolved. That's not relevant to this discussion, Karen snapped. It's completely relevant, the man shot back. You've been using your position on this board to harass people you don't like. This isn't about community harmony. This is about control. More voices joined in. She tried to fine me for having a garden gnome she thought was ugly. She reported me to code enforcement because my car was parked on my own lawn for 2 hours while I washed it. She walks around the neighborhood with a clipboard, looking for violations. The meeting was devolving into a Karen complaint session. Donald banged a gavel I didn't even know the HOA had. Order! Everyone, please! The room quieted down, but the energy had shifted. Karen was no longer the concerned board member looking out for the community. She was being exposed as a petty tyrant who'd been making people miserable. Donald took a deep breath. Based on the documentation Mr. Johnson has provided, and the fact that his gate was properly approved by the board, I see no grounds for any HOA action. The gate stays. That's ridiculous, Karen shouted. You can't just... Karen, the decision is made, Donald said firmly. The gate was approved. It meets all regulations. There's nothing to discuss. Then I call for a vote to overturn the approval. Susan shook her head. You can't overturn an approval that was properly granted without cause. And personal dislike isn't cause. Karen looked around the table, realizing she was losing. Fine. Then I'm issuing a violation notice for the hostile environment clause. She pulled out a paper from her folder and slid it across the table. Donald picked it up, read it, and set it down. Karen, you can't unilaterally issue violation notices. That requires a board vote. I'm a board member. I have that authority. No, Susan said, her voice sharp now. You don't. And frankly, this vendetta against Mr. Johnson needs to stop. You've overstepped your authority multiple times, and it's making the entire board look bad. The other 2 board members, who'd been silent this whole time, both nodded. Karen's eyes went wide. Vendetta? I'm trying to protect our community values. By calling 911 on a legal gate, one of the other board members said. By having your son vandalize someone's property? That's not protecting anything, Karen. Karen grabbed her poster board and her papers. Fine. If this board won't stand up for community standards, then I'll take this to the city. I'll file complaints with code enforcement. I'll contact the local news. Everyone will know what kind of hostile neighbor we have here." She pointed at me. "You think you've won? This is just beginning." She stormed out of the community center, the door slamming behind her. The room sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Donald sighed deeply. "Well, that was unpleasant. Mr. Johnson, I apologize on behalf of the board. Your gate is approved and will remain approved. If Karen continues to harass you, please document it and bring it to our attention." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. The meeting adjourned and several neighbors came up to shake my hand or offer words of support. About time someone stood up to her. "We've got your back if she tries anything else. Let us know if you need witnesses for anything." I thanked them all, genuinely touched by the support. But as I drove home, Karen's parting words echoed in my mind. This is just beginning. She wasn't going to let this go. And I had no idea what her next move would be. That night, I reviewed the security camera footage from the past few days, just to make sure everything was working properly. Most of it was boring. Me coming and going. Delivery drivers. The occasional neighbor walking by. But there was one clip that made my blood run cold. At 3:47 a.m. the previous night, while I was asleep, Brad had walked up to my gate. He stood there for a full 2 minutes, just staring at it. Then he took out his phone and took pictures. From multiple angles. Close-ups of the lock mechanism. Photos of the hinges. He was planning something. I downloaded the footage and saved it to 3 different locations. Then I sent a copy to my email and to Officer Martinez. Subject line: Additional evidence in vandalism case. Sunday morning, I woke up to find a letter taped to my front door. Not in my mailbox. Taped directly to the door. I checked the camera footage. Brad had put it there at 6:23 a.m. Just walked right up to my door and taped it there. The letter was typed, formal looking. Mr. Johnson, you are hereby notified that a formal complaint has been filed with the City Code Enforcement Office regarding unpermitted structures on your property. An inspector will be visiting within the next 10 business days. Additionally, a complaint has been filed with the county regarding potential violation of emergency access regulations. You will be hearing from them as well. Your refusal to be a reasonable neighbor has forced us to take these actions. This could have all been avoided if you had simply been willing to compromise. Sincerely, the Henderson family. I read it twice. They were filing false complaints with the city. Trying to use government agencies to harass me because the HOA had sided with me. I photographed the letter. Saved the camera footage of Brad taping it to my door. Added it all to my documentation folder. Then I called Officer Martinez. It went to voicemail. Officer Martinez, this is Matt Johnson. I'm calling about the vandalism case involving Bradley Henderson. I have new evidence of continued harassment, and wanted to know what my options are. Please call me back when you get a chance. I spent the rest of Sunday in a state of low-grade anxiety. Checking my cameras constantly. Jumping at every sound outside. Karen and Brad were escalating. And I had no idea how far they were willing to take this. Monday morning, I went to work but couldn't concentrate. My phone kept buzzing with notifications from my security cameras. Most were false alarms. Cars driving by. Birds setting off the motion sensors. But around 11 a.m., I got an alert that made my stomach drop. Someone was at my gate. I opened the camera app. It was a man in a city uniform, clipboard in hand, taking photos of my gate. The code enforcement inspector. Already. Karen had said within 10 business days. It had been less than 24 hours. She must have filed the complaint as an emergency or pulled some strings to get someone out this fast. I wanted to leave work and go home. But I forced myself to stay calm. The gate was legal. I had all the permits. There was nothing the inspector could find wrong. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. Because I was starting to realize something. Karen didn't need to win legally. She just needed to make my life miserable enough that I gave up. And judging by her behavior so far, she was more than willing to dedicate unlimited time and energy to that goal. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Johnson? This is Inspector Williams from City Code Enforcement. I'm at your property regarding a complaint that was filed. Are you available to speak? Here we go. Inspector Williams was waiting for my response. I took a breath and tried to keep my voice steady. Yes, I'm the owner. I'm at work right now, but I have all the permits and documentation. The gate was fully approved by both the HOA and the city. I understand, Inspector Williams said, his tone neutral. The complaint alleges that the structure was built without proper permits. Do you have the permit numbers handy? I pulled up my documentation folder on my computer. Read off the permit numbers. There was a pause as he presumably checked his database. Okay, I'm seeing the permits here. They appear to be in order. And the structure matches what was approved. Relief flooded through me. So there's no violation? Not that I can see. The complaint also mentioned emergency access issues, but this is clearly a residential driveway gate on private property. That's not an emergency access concern. So what happens now? I'll file my report stating that the structure is permitted and compliant. The complaint will be closed. However, I do need to inform you that the person who filed the complaint has the right to appeal my findings. Of course they did. How long does that process take? Could be a few weeks. But honestly, Mr. Johnson, appeals are rarely successful when the permits are this clearly in order. I wouldn't worry too much. We ended the call and I sat back in my chair. One threat neutralized. But Karen had also mentioned filing with the county about emergency access. That would be coming too. And who knew what else she'd try. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in a strange state of hypervigilance. Every day I'd check my cameras obsessively. Every time I came home, I'd inspect my property for new vandalism. The county inspector came and went, finding nothing wrong, just like the city inspector. Karen tried filing a complaint with the fire marshal about the gate supposedly blocking emergency vehicle access. The fire marshal came out, measured everything, and determined that my private driveway had nothing to do with emergency access routes. Each complaint was dismissed. Each inspection found nothing wrong. But the stress was exhausting. Then something unexpected happened. 3 weeks after the HOA meeting, I got a call from Donald Reeves. Matt, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're having a special board meeting tomorrow night. Karen's being removed from the board. I sat up straight. What? How? Turns out, filing false complaints and using her board position to harass residents violates our HOA bylaws. Several board members and at least a dozen residents filed formal complaints against her. We voted, and it was unanimous among the other 4 of us. She's out. I couldn't quite process it. Does she know? She will tomorrow night. I wanted to let you know in case she escalates. Thank you for the warning. That night, I made sure all my cameras were working and even parked my car in the garage instead of the driveway. Just in case. The next evening, my phone started blowing up with texts from neighbors. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Karen's getting removed. Are you going to be there? This is going to be epic. I decided not to go. I'd had enough drama. Instead, I stayed home, ordered takeout, and tried to relax for the first time in weeks. Around 8:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I checked the camera feed. It was Susan Chen from the HOA board. I opened the door. Hi, Susan. Hi, Matt. Just wanted to stop by and let you know that Karen has been officially removed from the board. She's no longer in any position of authority in the HOA. How did she take it? Susan made a face. About as well as you'd expect. Lots of yelling, threats to sue, claims that we're all conspiring against her. But it's done. And I wanted you to know that if she retaliates in any way, the board will back you completely. I appreciate that more than you know. After Susan left, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The next few days were quiet. No complaints filed. No letters taped to my door. No Brad lurking around at 3 a.m. It seemed like maybe, finally, it was over. Then, exactly 1 week after Karen's removal, I came home from work to find a "for sale" sign in her yard. I stood there staring at it. They were moving. Mrs. Patterson walked over, grinning. "Did you see? She's leaving. Can't stand that she's not in charge anymore, so she's packing up and going." "I can't believe it. Believe it. I heard her telling someone on the phone that she can't live in a neighborhood that doesn't appreciate her contributions. Good riddance, I say." Over the next month, I watched as the Henderson house went through the selling process. Brad's truck appeared less and less. Karen stopped going on her clipboard walks around the neighborhood. It was like the whole street could breathe again. The house sold in 3 weeks. A young couple with a toddler moved in. I introduced myself, mentioned I was next door, and they were genuinely friendly. "We heard there was some drama with the previous owners," the wife said. "But everyone in the neighborhood has been so welcoming. We're really happy to be here." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "And if you ever need anything, just knock." She smiled. "Actually, we love your gate. We're thinking of installing something similar. Would you mind sharing your contractor's information?" I laughed. A genuine, relieved laugh. "I'd be happy to." That evening, I sat on my porch, looking at my gate. The gate that had caused so much chaos. So many police visits, HOA meetings, false complaints, and sleepless nights. But it was still there. Standing firm on my property line. Exactly where it belonged. My phone buzzed with a text from Officer Martinez. "Just wanted to let you know that Bradley Henderson accepted a plea deal for the vandalism charge. Restitution, community service, and probation. Case closed." I typed back a simple, "Thank you." And just like that, it was really over. I'd installed a gate on my own property to stop trespassing. And I'd ended up fighting a war I never wanted. But I'd won. Not because I was confrontational or aggressive. But because I documented everything, followed every rule, and refused to back down when I was in the right. Karen had tried to use her position, false complaints, harassment, and intimidation to get her way. And it had all backfired spectacularly. She'd lost her board position. Her son had a criminal record. And she'd been forced to move out of a neighborhood where everyone now knew exactly who she was. I pressed the button on my remote. The gate opened smoothly. I walked through it and closed it behind me. On my property. Protecting my space. Exactly as it should be. Sometimes standing up for yourself is exhausting. Sometimes doing the right thing feels like the hardest thing in the world. But it's always worth it. Because at the end of the day, your property is yours. Your boundaries matter. And no amount of entitlement from others changes that fundamental truth. The gate stayed. Karen left. And life in the neighborhood finally returned to peaceful. The way it should have been all along.